Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's live in the Anti Diet Sisterhood Facebook group, where we're going to be diving into intuitive eating and medical conditions and how you can honor your health while still being able to enjoy your favorite foods. My name is Taylor Deacon. I am a registered dietitian for over 4 years now with experience in eating disorders, sports nutrition, and plant based nutrition. But with my private practice lifelong wellness goals, I support individuals who have history of eating disorders or disordered eating to really help them learn to nourish their body without restriction and stop letting food rules control your life. So, today I really want to dive into this topic because I think it's a very common myth with intuitive eating that it's the all you can eat eating plan, or there isn't much thought that goes into your food choices. And is it possible to practice intuitive eating with certain medical conditions? So, I want to dive into this topic and debunk that myth because that is far from the truth. And I know this was a big question that came up in the group as well. So today we'll really dive into how to practice intuitive eating with medical conditions that do require you to maybe limit or restrict certain food groups or foods, and how you can practice things like gentle nutrition, mindful eating, and navigate intuitive eating with certain medical conditions. I will save time at the end for any questions. So if you do have questions that pop up, feel free to either save them for the end and you can comment at the end, or you can comment throughout the live and I'll scroll back and answer your questions at the end. So before we dive in, I do want to do a brief overview of what intuitive eating is. Intuitive eating is a self care and flexible approach to your health and your eating habits. No big emphasis on both self care and flexible. And there are 10 principles, and we can talk about the different 10 principles of intuitive eating in a separate live. But I want to acknowledge that they are there. They're meant to be a guide and not a set of rules that you have to follow. But of course, there are certain medical conditions that do require modifications to your eating patterns. And again, it is possible to practice intuitive eating regardless of those limitations. And we'll again dive into that today. But some examples of common medical conditions that do require food restrictions or modifications, some pretty common ones like diabetes, celiac disease, or gluten intolerance, food allergies, irritable bowel syndrome, chronic kidney disease, heart disease, high cholesterol. Really, the list can go on. And there is, of course, different things you can tailor in your nutrition patterns to help manage those medical conditions. Now, some real life examples. So, for anyone who has celiac disease or gluten intolerance, they personally want to either avoid or restrict gluten completely because if they consume it, then there are negative adverse reactions. It does impact their health in a negative way, such as nausea, vomiting, cramping, low energy, fatigue, and that can go on for days after someone who has celiac disease or gluten intolerance consumes a food that contains gluten. So that's one example where we might have to consider some modifications to food choices. Another example being with diabetes, a very common nutrient that comes into question there is sugar and what's the best type, how much should I eat to manage my diabetes. And this is really going to be a personal approach to everyone in any medical condition. But with someone who has diabetes, they likely are focusing more on incorporating more whole grain sources of carbohydrates that break down into sugar because they know this type of food tends to help balance their blood sugars out better than a type of food that contains maybe some more easily digested sugar, such as candy or cookies, sugary drinks like soda. Those are things they're going to consider when they have diabetes. Now, if you do have a specific medical condition that you're not sure of and you're not sure what the specific requirements or maybe restrictions might be, please feel free to either ask a question specifically about it separately in a private message, or if you feel comfortable in the comments. Keep in mind, this is Facebook, this is a live video, it's not meant to be medical nutrition therapy. But again, just so we can go over some common medical conditions and how you can, as a whole, practice intuitive eating if you have to make these restrictions. And it's really important to note, if you have a medical condition that requires modifications to your food choices, look at it in a way of caring for your health and managing your health versus dieting. Because, of course, pretty much all of us or most of us get into intuitive eating because we have a history of dieting. And oftentimes, when you're diving into intuitive eating, the very first principle is restrict the diet mentality. So that's where that mindset or maybe that myth comes into play, where we think intuitive eating is giving no thought to food choices. But in reality, again, we can practice these specific modifications to what our body might need, what's best for our health, without having it to be about dieting. Again, it can be more for your health. It doesn't have to be about dieting. Now, when I posted in the group about doing this live, this was a big question that came up around certain medical restrictions or certain medical conditions that might cause someone to have a lot of chronic pain, and they have to pay more attention to anti-inflammatory lifestyle. So I wanted to touch a little bit on that too, since that was a more specific medical condition or concern for those who had questions. So, very common one, for example, being maybe fibromyalgia, where there's chronic pain going on and you want to consume more anti inflammatory foods. Again, in the name of health, not in the name of dieting. Someone who wants to focus on this can focus on things that they can add more of that are going to help reduce inflammation in their body. So, antioxidant rich food like fruits and vegetables, omega-3 rich fatty acid foods such as fish, avocado, nuts and seeds, or even certain herbs and spices like turmeric, cumin, and ginger can be anti-inflammatory. So for someone who has chronic pain, they might be focusing a bit more on those type of nutrients to include, and then they might have to really watch out for how their body responds to food that might cause more inflammation, which is typically things like fried foods, more processed foods that have some more additives into them. And again, everyone's different. I don't mean to bring up these foods in a way to say one's worse or better than the other. It's just about what type of nutrients do they have and how are they going to impact your personal medical condition. So, how can we actually implement intuitive eating with these food restrictions? Gentle nutrition is key. Gentle nutrition is the very last principle of intuitive eating. As some of you might know, it's the last principle for a reason. It is the first principle being restrict the diet mentality. It starts with that because, again, when someone's getting into intuitive eating, they're working on the mindset part of their food and relate or their nutrition habits and relationship with food. So starting there is important, and then once you work through the mindset piece, then you can dive into gentle nutrition and how can you eat in a way that honors your health. So what is gentle nutrition? It is really just a balance between food knowledge and your preferences and your likes. So, food knowledge being some of the examples I gave just before this. So, again, someone who has gluten intolerance or celiac disease, their food knowledge being they want to avoid or restrict gluten. For someone who has fibromyalgia, their food knowledge is I want to consume more omega-3 anti-inflammatory, antioxidant rich food choices. So again, some quick examples, but tying that knowledge to what you actually like. Now, I brought this up just a moment ago too, but also focusing on what foods can you enjoy with this medical condition rather than what has to be restricted. Because if we're focused solely on what has to be restricted, that can put us back in that diet mentality and make it really difficult to practice intuitive eating with the right mindset. So, again, focus on what you can enjoy, what you get to include versus what do I have to take away. And it's really important to remind yourself, regardless of the medical condition that you do have, reminding yourself that technically you could have X, Y, and Z food if you did want to. But how is your body and your health? How is that going to respond if you do consume that food? That's where the gentle nutrition piece comes into play, and then you can make the best choice for yourself. But it's important to remind yourself and just train your brain really to remember that, hey, I can have that food, no one's stopping me. And then you can be in a better mindset. You're not in that restrictive mindset where it feels like maybe you're thinking about that food all the time. It feels hard to restrict it. You feel like you're not practicing intuitive eating correctly. It's really just about that mindset shift, knowing again, I can have this. What's going to help me feel the best? And another important principle, but also just thing to really practice is how you can tune into your hunger and fullness cues as well. Because if you are not practicing eating consistently, where you're eating every 3 to 4 hours, or you're restricting food because you feel like it's the best for your medical condition, and what I mean by that is restricting and not eating enough food, then it can be really hard to actually tune into your hunger and fullness cues and actually be able to be mindful and practice that gentle nutrition. So, really important principle number two, and I believe three of intuitive eating being the honoring your hunger, respecting your fullness. Again, some key basic things that you can practice is making sure you're eating consistently throughout the day, which is about every 3 to 4 hours to keep your blood sugars, your energy, your focus stable. And then you're in a more mindful mindset where you can think about the food choices you're making and how they do impact your health and your medical condition. And also remembering, again, it's about focusing how you can nourish your body and take care of it, that self care piece of intuitive eating rather than restriction. So, I just want to wrap up with some practical tips for navigating intuitive eating with food restrictions and how you can personalize your approach. So if there is certain medical conditions you have where you feel you have to restrict, but you really enjoy certain foods that maybe for your health are better to limit or even restrict completely. Let's just keep using the example of the celiac disease or gluten intolerance. So for them, they cannot eat regular bread or pasta, anything that really contains wheat. Otherwise, they have that adverse reaction. But of course, a lot of us love bread, we love pasta, we love those types of food that do contain gluten. So, in their personalized approach, they might need to find some satisfying alternatives. And luckily, for someone who has celiac disease or gluten intolerance, there are a lot of options out there now to get those types of food, but get them gluten free and still be able to enjoy bread or pasta in a way that's not going to negatively impact your health. So think about it in the specific medical condition that you have. What foods are you having to modify or maybe limit that you really enjoy? And how can you still include them in your life, whether it's a different alternative, maybe making a dish that has similar flavors or textures to whatever that food might be, can be really helpful. And then practicing mindful eating, tying that back into tuning into your hunger and fullness cues and eating consistently. It's going to be able to help you be more mindful, check in with yourself, and be able to make the best decision for your health. And when you can also slow down, take your time, and really enjoy the food you're eating by practicing mindful eating, it can also help you feel more satisfied physically and mentally from the food that you're eating. And this can also help you navigate intuitive eating when you have some restrictions on the food you can eat that might make some of the choices you make less satisfying than what you were able to choose before. So, again, slowing down, taking your time, really savoring that meal you're enjoying. And then lastly, just making sure you're focusing on variety and how can you enjoy food. Something that's really helpful if you feel limited in the food choices that you can make because of medical conditions is to explore new food options that you haven't tried before or new recipes that fit within any of the medical restrictions that still bring you joy and satisfaction. There's something new, and that way you don't feel like you're stuck eating the same things over and over again if you feel really limited or restricted. So I do really encourage anyone to, especially with medical conditions, again, explore new recipes, new food choices so that you can get your variety and satisfaction even when you have restrictions for medical conditions. So, just wrapping up before we get into questions, remember that intuitive eating is really about self care, nourishment, and flexibility. It's not about restriction, even if you have medical conditions that might require those modifications, limitations, or restrictions. And gentle nutrition is key so that you can tie together what you know is best for your health with what you really enjoy and also focus on what you can add versus what you have to take away. Now, for anyone who would like to get a little more support on creating consistency so you can tune into your hunger and fullness cues to help you practice mindful eating more efficiently and really just to feel less guilt around your food choices, I will be sharing a link to my free food freedom training video. It's about 20 minutes long and it will dive into how you can create this more consistency, practice mindful eating, and feel less guilt around your food choices. So, again, that'll be in the comments for you after the live if you're interested, and you can click it and access it. It's free. And I do want to save a few minutes for questions. So, if anyone does have questions now, whether you're here live with me, please feel free to drop them in the comments. Otherwise, you can drop the questions in the live or in the replay once it's posted. So I'm going to see if we have any questions before. Okay, looks like no questions while we're on the live. So I will wrap it up here. Again, I will be dropping in the comments the link to access the 20-minute food freedom training. And if you're here with the replay, please drop your questions in the comments or reach out to me in a separate private message if you feel you need some more support on navigating your specific medical condition with intuitive eating, because truly talking with a registered dietitian like myself or your healthcare team is going to be the best way to get support rather than doing it on your own. Thank you, everyone.